Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to spend a little time between Tory scandals to discuss a Tory failure in the form of the news that we failed to achieve David Cameron's proud boast, his export targets, that we will meet £1 trillion worth of UK exports by 2020. We seem to have missed it by about 15 years, in fact. Although, let's be honest, it was a pointless target anyway. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, just as a reminder that pretending that aims were plans isn't just a recent Tory malady. It didn't just start with Boris Johnson. You know, articles are reporting now that David Cameron said that his goal was to boost exports to £1 trillion by 2020. And you think to yourself, well, why is it news now? It's 2 years later. I suppose they were giving them the benefit of the doubt, maybe with the pandemic. And it's like, right, OK, exports should be sort of back to where they were. What's going on then? You know, needless to say, of course, the target was not met and is still not met now, even if we call this 2020. Brexit and other issues mean that we're now forecast to achieve this in, well, maybe 2035, 15 years late. But before I get onto a couple of the obvious reasons why this might be, and we know that the B word will loom large, shall we just discuss the target itself? Because this is a classic example of a completely pointless target for numerous reasons. First of all, Cameron said this in 2012, I gather. So he was giving a target for 8 years' time. Saying he wanted exports boosted to £1 trillion doesn't necessarily mean what people will take it to mean. If Cameron was making this statement in 2012, he will have been working on 2011 trade figures. Our total value of exports in 2011 was about £517 million. So what he will have been talking about was basically a doubling, almost doubling of exports. Now, that is a grand promise, but was he? See, first of all, there are two things that can boost exports, which are not necessarily a good thing in themselves. The first is inflation. I mean, if a government presides over high levels of inflation, as Tory governments do, certainly this one has, then it's easier to meet the aim, because the value of £1 in 8 years' time will be significantly lower than if you kept inflation under control. Now, the Tories were not presiding over double-figure inflation levels for most of their time in government, but it was still about 40% higher than the Labour average. So if we were to take the midpoint of 2011 as our base and work out, you know, what that £517 million worth of exports would be in today's money, it would be 798 million. So not a trillion. Actually, getting on for it, but not a trillion. But with the same level of trade, it would have looked like it had grown. But that's the same level of trade. It's like shipping like the same volume of goods and the same services. But that's just the inflationary effect. Be interesting to see what our exports actually are. We don't have the 2022 data yet. Of course, when we start getting bits of it, I mean, we need to wait until we've got the definitive figure. That'll take a while. Although I will say it was 654 million in 2021. Billion. So it'd million, that wouldn't be very much. So it'd better have done some power lifting to get up to the 2011 equivalent. Otherwise, not only will exports under the Tories have failed to meet their lofty aims, but it will have actually declined in real terms. I am, of course, expecting to find that the actual level of trade has gone down in real terms because we already know that Brexit has hamstrung our capacity to trade. And the second way you can show a boost in exports is a little bit more real. As in, it would actually boost the volumes of trade, but it's not often seen as a positive thing for a government to be doing. And that is if you lower the value of the pound against the currencies of your major export markets in particular. Then your exports are more competitive in those markets. So you can shift more of them, you can sell more. So you'll see more exports. Double-edged sword, though, because then imports become more expensive and also, well, government borrowing. And people going on foreign holidays get pissed off. Well, since 2012, the pound is about, what, 30 cents lower against the dollar, about 6 cents lower against the euro. So it's lower against both the dollar and the euro. That should mean that our export markets is more competitive now in those markets than in 2012. So our exports should have been boosted in real terms as a result of the devaluation of the pound, most of which took place after the Brexit referendum, in our major export markets. Only this hasn't happened. Our exports are lower in real terms. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, if you restrict access for your exports in your major markets, as well as add additional costs in the form of, say, I don't know, expensive red tape and tariffs where they didn't exist before, you're going to somewhat counteract the benefit to exports of tanking the value of your national currency. I'll also point out, I don't believe we would have met the target were it not for Brexit. This is not all down to Brexit. I mean, 2020 was a bad year for exports in general. We're not going to look at that, due to the pandemic. But we weren't even on course for it in 2019. And that was before we'd left the EU or the single market. That being said, our exports were growing. They were growing in real terms up until 2020. So in 2019, you could at least say that our exports were growing in real terms, even if not on a trajectory to hit $1 trillion the following year. It's only since Brexit that they've fallen in real terms. The Brexiteers still trying to push the idea that exports have done well, always fail to take inflation into account. Usually some other things as well, but they never take inflation into account. But we would still have failed to hit the target. And that is because Cameron's target for exports was, it's the same as Johnson's target for, say, levelling up or hospitals, or Sunak's target for extra maths. There's no plan behind them. So, of course, they're not going to be achieved. It's an attempt at President Kennedy's man on the moon speech, isn't it? But although Kennedy may not have actually believed that the USA would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, which they did anyway out of sheer stubbornness, there was at least a funded programme to achieve the aim at some point. What did Cameron actually do to boost our exports? What have the Conservatives done at all to try and help our exports? They won't even talk to businesses. Brexit has made them go, no, 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 no. That's not helping. What have they done? Even given that Cameron made his pledge before Brexit seemed likely, let alone certain, what initiative has he or any of his successors put in place to make it happen? Nothing at all. It was just saying something for the sake of saying something. Oh, yeah, we're presiding over this terrible austerity. Everyone's very unhappy. I need to promise them some sunlit uplands. We're going to get our exports to £1 trillion, lads. By 2020, no less. It's possible that he knew his economic policies would lower the value of the pound against other currencies, but it would have taken a mighty crash to have met this target through nothing more than shaking confidence in the pound. But what's Cameron's boast? What it has done is it's given us an opportunity to re-examine our trading arrangements. We're now told we'll hit the target in 2035, possibly. Now, as far as I can see, not because we'll necessarily be shifting more goods and concluding more deals that our exports will be growing in real terms, but just the slow march of inflation naturally lowering the real terms value of what £1 trillion actually is. In fact, as we're expecting to experience several more years of high inflation, albeit not as high as last year, but still, the government like to have an inflation target of 2%. So anything above that, or anything significantly above it, is by definition considered high. And we're expected to have that for several more years. So as a result of that, you may reasonably wonder, so why would it take another 15 years? Are the people who calculated this expecting further real terms drops in exports? Because with 2019 levels of trade, I'll tell you something, it would not take until 2035 for that to be worth £1 trillion in future money. Are they factoring in much lower levels of inflation than many economists would think are likely? Or are they factoring in lower levels of trade? Either way, the whole thing reminds us of two very clear points. First, the Tories just say things. It's not new. It's not just with Boris Johnson. It's just what they've been doing since 2010. They say things, they never do things. They promise great things, but there's never a plan behind it. It's all a facade. Every outcome that they promise is a lie because there is never any work on the ground to achieve it. The second point is that our exports have fallen in real terms since before the first couple of years of the Tory government. They've fallen in real terms. That is despite the pound being weaker than against the dollar and the euro. That helps exports. But the real terms value of our exports is down. That is because mathematically it's certain there's another factor which is overriding, which is greater than the weaker pound. We all know what the factor is. And we know why it is. Businesses know what it is and why it is. Investors know what it is and why it is. Politicians, the media, the shady think tanks, they all know what and why it is. The growing number of people abandoning Brexit that we can see in the polls know what it is, although not necessarily always why it is, because they're only slowly getting real information. And even if we eventually limp to that £1 trillion worth of exports, which at some point we will, in the far future when it costs 50 quid for a penny chew, it will still represent a serious decline in our trading power since Brexit. Because in real terms, we need to get our levels of trade back to where it was before Brexit. And how do we do that? With higher trade barriers than existed before Brexit. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.